and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Brexit claims another victim. Who will replace Theresa May? Bojo is waiting in the wings. And Trump's very confusing and contradictory Iran policy. Who's in charge? Cross-talking some real news. I'm joined by my guest, Dmitry Babich. He's a political analyst with Sputnik International. And in Belgrade, we cross to Marcus Papadopoulos. He is the editor of Politics First magazine. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Let's go to Belgrade. Marcus, we've had a tumultuous few weeks with the Trump administration showing the world in one form or another its Iran policy. It is very confusing. It is very contradictory. And I have to wonder, what is in play right here? Is this a big game of bluff, or we just have multiple centers of power within the White House trying to achieve their own aims? Because Trump seems to be all over the place. As a matter of fact, even contradicting Bolton and Pompeo. It's a very confusing picture. What do you read? Go ahead, Belgrade.
Well, Peter, any discussion about the growing American threat to Iran would not be complete without reference to how Iran is a great force for stability and security in the Middle East, because Iran prevented the cancerous tentacles of the Taliban from extending into the Middle East. And of course, it was Iran that ensured the defeat of ISIS in Iraq. Now, that is not something you are ever going to hear about in Western mainstream media, but the fact is that Iran is a great source of stability and security in the Middle East.
But we still have Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in public making claims that Iran and ISIS are in league with each other. I mean, he's still trying to sell that, okay? That's what they're selling the American public. I mean, this is not only is that wrong, it's immoral to make that claim because of what you just said here. Let me turn to Dmitry here. I mean, you know, it's going to be 120,000 troops, it's going to be 10,000 troops, it's going to be 1,500 troops. We keep hearing different things going on here. Is there any kind of focused a policy here? Because we know that all of the major players, including Donald Trump himself, has had a great deal of antipathy towards Iran. Now you have policymakers in charge, like Bolton and Pompeo. It looks like they have their own independent foreign policy of Trump.
To be frank with you, I don't care much about the amount of troops because
there's a lot there already.
Yeah, right. the fate of war and peace will not be decided by the number of troops or the number of aircraft carriers. It will be decided in Washington by public opinion and by the confrontation between Trump and the Congress, between various factions inside the White House. And my feeling is that there is not going to be any war. Why? You know, why? I think we have to thank the 2016 election for that, because I am a huge critic of Trump. I don't like a lot of his personal traits, and I don't like what he's doing. But he is in conflict with the Congress. So when he started talking about having all options on the table with Iran, which is basically a threat of war, you know, immediately he had the Congress against him, and we had dozens, hundreds of articles.
So it's still a domestic gambit here.
Absolutely. If Hillary Clinton had been elected in 2016, and if she decided to start a war with Iran, the war would start 100%. That's why I'm happy that Trump won, not because I like him as a person, but because it prevented the worst.
Well, that's a good point. Let's go back to Belgrade. Marcus, let's tie in, let's connect some other dots here. Trump, during the campaign, wanted to get out of Afghanistan, wanted to get out of Syria, even tried, and then he had to backtrack here. I mean, Iran is a perfect distraction to maintain the current American foreign policy in the Middle East. And of course, it makes the Israelis and the Saudis very happy. Go ahead, Marcus in Belgrade.
Look, Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Libya. The Iranian military is extremely powerful, is extremely well motivated, is extremely well led, and is extremely well equipped. And I don't believe whoever is in the White House will opt for the military option, because in the event of a war between America and Iran, the Americans wouldn't just be up against the Iranian military, they would be up against millions of Iranians who would volunteer for the front line, as we saw during the Iraq-Iran war. What I think the Americans are going to continue doing is to try and asphyxiate the Iranian economy,
right,
because if the Americans are successful, then that will bring down the Iranian government, and thereby the Iranian revolution will be destroyed. I've said this before, with Trump in the office, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for the Americans to try and bring down the Iranian government.
I agree with you. Marcus, I'm going to stay with you here. Whatever the number of troops are going to be deployed, it seems to me the most likely target or placement would be Iraq, because the Iraq parliament wants American troops to leave. Finally, after what, 18 years, finally leave Iraq. This is something that the neocons and the deep state do not want to have happen, against the will of the Iraqi people. And I think that, again, Iran functions as a foil because, well, Iran's influence in Iraq now is far greater now than it ever was, okay, particularly before 2003. How do you reflect upon that?
Yes, that is a serious impediment for the Americans, should they wish to embark on a military option against Iran, because on the one hand, the Iraqi government is to an extent compliant to the wishes, to the demands of the Americans. But on the other hand, as you've just said, they have very cordial relations with Iran. In fact, more cordial relations with Iran than what some people in the West believe. So Iraq would not be prepared, would not tolerate the Americans using their airspace or their maritime waters or their grounds for American troops to attack Iran. So the Americans would be in a dilemma there. But on the other hand, apart from Saudi Arabia, the Americans do have vast military bases in Gulf countries, and that would be more than sufficient for a military campaign against the Americans. But I still don't believe the Americans will resort to the military option against Iran. It would cost them far too much, and also it would jeopardize the security of their two principal allies in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Right. You reflect upon that, Dima, because I think Marcus is right. I mean, Trump is showing that he's doing something, okay? But I think at the same time, he's made it very clear, I mean, and it's been hinted in the mainstream media, that he doesn't want a war. Anything short of a war, fine, okay? Because he is a candidate for re-election here. But I think what's really remarkable, and I think this is what is not clear, is that John Bolton has waited decades to have the position he has right now. And we know his record about regime change, particularly when it comes to Iran. The temptation may be too great. And if something does go wrong, Trump will have to own it. Go ahead, Dima.
I think one positive consequence of this whole terrible story is that the mainstream media is now critical of Mike Pompeo.
Because they want to be against Trump. It's really kind of confusing after a while.
And they're almost destroying John Bolton. He deserved it. He deserved it for dozens of years. You know, they should have destroyed him in the media many years ago, but they're doing it now. Okay, thank God they're doing it now. I agree with Marcus that I don't believe in a war. I don't believe in a war for several reasons. You know, Iran first is in a pretty good position in Syria, so there is a chance that if Iran is attacked, Iranian allies in Syria may make life difficult for Israel. You know, so because of the expansion of Iranian influence, here I agree with Marcus, we have less a chance of a war in the region because too many players have a lot to lose. Israel may be in danger. The U.S. bases may be in danger. So by conducting this proactive policy...
That aircraft carrier group would be in danger.
A proactive policy of Iran in Syria, in Iraq, saved it from this war. You know, I think the war was much more real under Obama. Let me remind, the people, a lot of people are saying, oh, Trump is awful, Obama was just so nice, he was so peaceful.
7 wars.
Obama threatened Iran with a war in the beginning of his tenure, as the president, immediately after apologizing for helping the coup in Iran in 1953. This is the kind of apologies that we get from Obama. Okay, we did it wrong. Now we're going to start a war on you, right? That's his attitude. So I think that all in all, things are changing for the better in the Middle East after long years of suffering, precisely because the role of the destructive forces is decreasing.
But things can go wrong, okay, and that is the law of unintended consequences. Let's go back to Marcus here. I mean, both of what you're saying is very, very interesting, is because with the military-industrial complex and the Washington consensus they need more than anything else. They need a threat, not a war. They need a threat. And that's why they keep building up these threats, Anytime North Korea does something, the west coast of the United States is endangered. I mean, they inflate threats. That's necessary to keep those budgets. Let's not forget, just a few days ago, the Trump administration, through some kind of quirky law, or one-off, as we're told, we're going to supply billions of dollars more of arms to Saudi Arabia because of the threat. Not because they necessarily want war. They want the threat to maintain. 1 minute before we go to the break here. Go ahead, Marcos.
Well, I certainly don't agree that things are getting better in the Middle East. What I would say is this. On the one hand, there is more of an opportunity for achieving more stability in the Middle East. Why? Because Russia is back in vogue in the region, and that is very important. But on the other hand, Trump, like all American presidents, they are making the region more volatile. Trump even said recently he's prepared to share nuclear technology with Saudi Arabia. How catastrophic could that be for the region should Saudi Arabia develop nuclear weapons? All American presidents are the same.
Okay, Dima, 10 seconds before we go to the break.
Well, I think the situation is not good, but the reason why there is lesser chance for war is because Iran is in Yemen, so Saudi Arabia does not feel secure any longer. Iran is in Syria, so Israel has to weigh its options.
Well, I don't know if I would agree with you on that there, but I want to thank Marcus Papadopoulos in Belgrade for joining us. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on some real news. Stay with Art. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing some real news. And now we're joined by John Laughlin in Paris. He is a lecturer in political philosophy at ICES, the Catholic University of Vendée. Welcome to the program, John. Thank you for taking time out today. Theresa May is finally leaving. We all were predicting it. None of us got the date right, but we knew the exit was coming. Could have she succeeded? Was it a task beyond anyone being prime minister? After all, in all fairness, both major parties in Parliament are divided on this, and she never had her heart in Brexit. So at the beginning of this program, I said, Brexit claims another victim. That victim is Theresa May. Who's next? Go ahead, John.
Well, we'll have to wait and see who's next. As you know, the favourite is Boris Johnson. But I think that the commentators are pretty unanimous in Britain, and they all say one thing, and that is that she is or was the worst prime minister probably in the entire history of the United Kingdom, and certainly in anybody's memory. You're being very generous and gentlemanly, Peter, to say that it was a task that no one could have managed. But I'm afraid I don't share that view. I think that she made every single mistake possible. And she started by pretending to believe in Brexit when, as you say in your question, she didn't. And that was only the first of her many acts of dishonesty. You see, I think one of the difficulties that we have when trying to come to grips with this terrible prime ministership is that she gives the appearance, Theresa May, of being a straightforward, honest, dutiful woman. In fact, she has shown herself in the last 3 years to be completely dishonest, saying things that she didn't believe in. Brexit means Brexit. No deal is better than a bad deal, and so on. And these lies have led to her downfall, because as a result of not believing in what she was doing and in trying to do something she was not admitting to do, she, of course, came up against the buffers of reality and failed. So I don't think there can be any mitigating circumstances for her at all. She made every single strategic error, every single tactical error, and she above all made an error of human integrity. And that really, I think, in politics is unforgivable.
You know, Dima, one of the major criticisms is that she had self-interest. It was what would be good for Theresa May, and secondly, what would be good for the Conservative Party. Those were two cardinal errors, I think many people would say, because she never really believed in Brexit. And some people will say the last 3 years, she was so secretive in her negotiations that, you know, basically giving a fait accompli to the British public and expecting Parliament to pass a plan that they had really nothing to do with in the first place. Dima.
I don't know if anyone could resolve this problem in her situation, because I think she was really in a very difficult situation.
But if you had a leader that was for Brexit, I tend to think there might have been a different outcome.
I mean, David Cameron before her seemed to me to be absolutely the worst prime minister. You could not get worse than him, because he compared Putin to Hitler, he compared Russia to Nazi Germany. He, said that Putin somehow played with that referendum, which was absolute nonsense, you know. But then she outdid him, you know, with Salisbury, she outdid him. You know, no one forced her to make that statement. I know Russia, I know what you are up to. No, she didn't, because we were not up to anything bad, actually. And if we were up to anything bad, they would have shown the evidence. They still haven't shown even the man who was supposedly poisoned, you know. So my lessons that I think we can draw from this whole situation is that this ultra-liberal globalist or neoliberal ideology is very, very vindictive, you know. If communism penalized classes, if Nazism penalized nations like Jews or the Roma people, the ultraliberalism penalizes the nations that oppose its globalist projects.
That's right.
You know, the EU was a globalist project, and the British voted against it.
Yes.
And they were crushed.
Brussels through all this has been so vindictive.
Absolutely.
But that was supposed to be a lesson to everyone else. But I want to talk about the future.
Just a few words.
Let me go back to Paris here. John, Boris Johnson, I mean, we know a lot about him already, and he's the leading contender. I mean, we have Cameron, we have Theresa May. Is Boris Johnson going to be any better than either one of them? Go ahead, John.
No, not necessarily. He has other defects. He doesn't have the same one as May by any means. But he's not known as a forceful leader, and he wasn't a particularly good foreign secretary. He was obviously terrible on the Russian issue, but he didn't give the impression of being a good leader. He is, of course, very popular in the country and popular with conservative activists. But I'm not particularly optimistic about him being able to succeed where she failed. But I do want to, although I very much agree with what Dimitri Babic has just said, there are two other points that mustn't be forgotten. The first is that if she had had the same majority as David Cameron, she may well have succeeded better. But she lost her own majority by calling an election early in 2017 and then fighting it in parts of the country which were never going to vote Conservative. And the second point, the second lesson I'd like to draw from this, because this refers to your question, Peter, about the future, is that Theresa May's failure has been obvious to anyone for at least 6 months, if not since 2017. Yeah. After the election, frankly, she should have resigned, having effectively lost it. And yet she was kept in power by the Conservative Party, by Conservative members of Parliament, by the cabinet. And so her failure is also a sign of a deep corruption, I would say. I'm not talking about financial corruption, but moral and spiritual, political corruption inside the Conservative Party. So we will be distracted now for several months by this show, this beauty pageant of the different leaders. But the fact is that they have still got the same MPs in place in July and the same figures in Parliament. And that, in a sense, is going to remain a problem. And only today, Sunday, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the current one, who will no doubt go, but will still be an MP, has implied that he might vote against a Conservative government if it went for no-deal Brexit.
Yeah, okay.
So this,
but see, that's the whole point is that we still, Theresa May is leaving, but and Boris Johnson may be coming, but we still have Brexit looming here, and with no answers whatsoever.
Well,
I mean, this is going to be a major distraction because it's all show, it's all optics, but the problem remains. Dima.
Well, I can only comment in this way. And these people want to teach the world democracy. The EU and the UK have been saying during the last 30 years that they're the absolute pinnacle of civilization. They're the achievement, they're the most democratic ones. And look how they cannot agree on the simplest things, First, the EU said that Britain might have to pay from 40 to 100 billion euros. For what? For the EU administering, administering services to the UK. It's precisely these services that people voted against, and people are now being forced to pay for something that they didn't like, So it just shows us how inept the EU is and how difficult it is. Any structure, the reason why the EU will be in big danger now, not only because of this election during which maybe alternative parties can finally get into the European Parliament, and not only because they've been so rude to these alternative parties. Guy Verhofstadt, the former Belgian prime minister who heads one of the biggest factions in the European Parliament, called them Russia's fifth column. He called Salvini and Orban and other, basically, important people, heads of government. He called them Russia's fifth column. That reminds me of the worst times in our Soviet history.
Right.
This is the way the dissidents were called.
Right, exactly.
And the EU will lose not only because of this, but also because there is no way you can leave it legally. Britain has proven that it's impossible
it's
to leave.
It's the Hotel California, that's for sure. John, what is really fascinating to me and very, very sad is that the EU project, as it's developed, it's basically a destroyer of nations. That's why we have these alternative, populist, conservative in many ways, culturally conservative in many ways, sprouting all over the place because the EU's mission, it's not written in the details, but it's implied and applied is that you have to have your nation destroyed to become a viable member of the EU. And of course, it serves the elite's purposes. Go ahead, John.
Well, that's exactly right. It's always had a post-national ideology, and that post-national ideology has only got stronger in the last 20 years. It's the Maastricht Treaty and the introduction of the single currency, and it remains the central dogma of the European Union. And what is so incredible about this continuing obsession with the European Union in Britain is that, as anybody who lives in Europe, on the continent of Europe, can see, the project is collapsing internally. Never mind Britain, which itself is a major catastrophe. Brexit is a major catastrophe for the European Union because Britain's departure, if it happens, is the equivalent of not of one country leaving, but of 20 countries.
Exactly.
If you add up Cyprus and Luxembourg and all these small countries. But of course, internally, as we all know, Poland and Hungary are up in arms. The Greeks and the Germans are at each other's throats. Even the French and the Germans see very differently on different subjects. And in fact, the European Union, because everything is decided together, has become a structural system for exporting your problems to your neighbors. So you export your unemployment. If you're Poland, you export your unemployment to Britain. Germany obviously exports massively its goods to other countries. You export your debt problems, if you're Greece or Spain or another country, to the rest of the Eurozone. And that is why the thing is structurally condemned to collapse, because it is based on a system of de-responsibilization, in other words, of socialism at an international level.
30 seconds, Dima.
Well, the only response that the EU had to all of this was demonization. And I think the best comment came from the American conservative, where Pat Buchanan had his article published with the following quote: "What's wrong about having your own unique national identities? What's wrong with that?" That was his comment on the EU election.
Okay, that's it. We've run out of time. Many thanks to my guests here in Moscow, Belgrade, and in Paris. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.